A quick note before we get started. We recorded this show on Thursday night before everything went off the rails again with the Washington Spirit over the weekend. So you won't hear anything about that in this show, but I'm sure we'll discuss it down the road. And anyway, we've already got so much to talk about in this podcast. So here it is. Hope you enjoy it.
The Women's Soccer Review Podcast with Dwayne Rollins and Jonathan Tannenwald on the Sports Podcasting Network.
Welcome back to the Women's Soccer Review here on the Sports Podcasting Network. This is Jonathan Tannenwald of the Philadelphia Inquirer. It's been over 2 months since our last show, I realize. It's been way too long. A few things have happened since then. I had some plans for stuff to do during the Olympics, and they didn't come together because the featured guest was in Tokyo and had too much to do, and the time zones didn't work out. And none of that really should be surprising to anybody because that's the way things were with an Olympics in Japan. And then I went on the first real vacation I've taken in a long time for a couple of weeks. That took me out to the West Coast for a while, as everybody who follows me on Twitter knows. I ended up at the Women's International Champions Cup, which was a terrific time. Great to be in Portland for a week, see a lot of friends, watch some outstanding soccer games. You might talk a little bit about that in the course of the program. And now finally I'm back, settled in, returning to a rhythm of normal life and realizing, oh yeah, I haven't done a podcast in 2 months. I need to fix that. So here I am with a million things going on in the soccer world, men's and women's, as everybody who knows me knows well, but we've got time for this and to go through. There's no word to describe what the state of the NWSL is right now, except maybe FERT. That would be the one I think probably works the best. Except in some ways it's not, because the soccer's been really good, and we'll talk about that too a little bit with my dear friend RJ Allen of Backline Soccer, and as usual, more podcasts than I can count. The most recent of which, RJ, is?
So the last one technically is called Three in the Back. The one before that is Backheel Nutmeg, and the one before that is Dashing to the Races. So I currently have 3. I'll be recording Dashing to the Races actually once we're done with this.
And the producer of Three in the Back, last nameless Nick, is a guy who actually split a hotel room with him in Portland for a few days. Great guy. So I'm glad he's on board your program.
Yes. Yeah, he's a very knowledgeable individual, which is what you want in a producer.
You heard that, Kevin? No, I'm just kidding. Kevin Laramie, our producer, is a very knowledgeable guy who also has been plenty busy. He's now working for one of the TV networks up in Montreal on their Major League Soccer broadcasts, and I wouldn't be surprised if he's doing a little more than that behind the scenes as well, but I'll let him share that on social media before I share it on here. I don't know what order to do this in, so I think I'm just going to go in the order of the standings from top to bottom, which will peg Angel City last, but that might be a good thing because I'll be so frustrated by everything else by then that I'll really be able to say some things at that point. We will start with the Portland Thorns, first place by 4 points, running over just about everybody in the league at the moment, except the Reign, whom they lost to in Seattle in a fabulous game in front of the largest crowd in NWSL history. That was pretty cool. We'll get to the Reign in a moment, but I want to start with the Thorns and talk about them winning the ICC and use this yes as a moment. Oh, my God. He's going to plug his own stuff again. Can he please stop plugging his subscriptions to the Inquirer? No, folks, I can't. Sorry. Thank you all who for the last 2 months have read everything that I've written and subscribed to the Inquirer and shown that you support our soccer coverage. I really do appreciate it. One of the pieces that I wrote is that the International Champions Cup, even though it is technically a tournament of exhibition games, has a point to make to the NWSL, and that point to me is in the form of a flashing arrow that says, go that way. And that way is you should care not just about winning home games and selling tickets and jerseys off the backs of U.S. national team players, but you should care about winning trophies and competing for bigger trophies on an international stage like the Thorns did against Lyon and Barcelona And Houston acquitted itself quite well against Barcelona, and the Thorns went out and won the whole thing. And we all left Portland saying, we want more of that. And RJ, yeah, we do want more of that.
I think when you watch these games, I'm not a huge international club competition person. But when you watch these games, you can't help but get excited about them. Now, to be fair to the non-American teams, this is sort of their preseason. That is the hardest part, is finding a time when both teams are sort of at their peak, because you could tell at certain places that these are not, middle of the season equivalents. But I really had a good time watching these games. I didn't expect to enjoy it as much as I did, which might be on me as much as anything else. But I would like this to expand, because I think the more we can show different styles off, different players off, and sort of have some fun. Remember, soccer occasionally can be fun. I do think that helps.
They do intend to expand next year to 6 teams. They were looking at one point at going 8, but they're going to hold it to 6 for the time being. The idea is to have 4 from Europe and 2 from the NWSL, and they would like the 4 from Europe to be the champions of England, France, Germany, and Spain, which they think, for good reason, is going to get them a Champions League winner along the way. I don't know if they're going to pull it off, because the European teams have to want to come over here. But the NWSL side of it, they said, and I know the relevant sports organizers well enough to believe they're going to do it, the NWSL teams must have been the previous year's trophy winners. And that piece of it, merit-based qualification, the relevant sports have said this too. Until there's a Club World Cup, we're just going to go do this. And we're going to have teams that win NWSL trophies against teams that win trophies in Europe, and we're going to have them play against each other. And you want to say it's not really the best team, whatever. You said it, RJ. The soccer was terrific.
And I think, look, we can say, playing in Portland, is unfair for blah, blah, blah reasons. Playing in Providence Park is unlike anything else in women's soccer regularly, right? Yes, there'll be one-off games at men's stadiums, and there'll be, exhibitions, and there'll be things like that. But every time Providence Park holds a Thorns game or holds a game against a team that might play the Thorns, the place is packed. And I think having it, maybe they don't always have it in Portland, but right now, having it in Portland, having that kind of fan reaction from teams that don't always get a ton of fans. And I think being able to show that off, having that video of those games and having the stands packed, makes people who might not think of going to a game, even in a league that is more established, it makes it more accessible to them, and they might want to go, which helps rise attendance worldwide. Is it the biggest impact? No, but it helps. And anything that helps and doesn't hurt women's soccer right now, I am a fan of.
Had there not been the pandemic, the house would have been full, I'm pretty sure.
Absolutely.
And it would have been pretty full for Barcelona Lyon in one of the semifinals. And I got down to Portland on the Sunday before the tournament started. There was a Sounders Timbers game that night, which is the preeminent rivalry in American men's soccer, and a game that if you are a soccer fan in the United States, it must be on your bucket list to go to. There is no game and no atmosphere quite like it. And I walked out of Providence Park that night saying to myself, the next game on this field is Barcelona Lyon. And that was a pretty cool feeling. I would love to see it at Red Bull Arena at some point in the future if Gotham can qualify. And I think I am on safe ground in saying that the relevant sports folks would also like to see it at Red Bull Arena at some point in the future. But where it might be next year at the rate things are going, in addition to a venue on the West Coast, there'll be one probably on the East, and that one might be North Carolina, because the Courage are in second place, and they just keep rolling along, don't they?
It feels like Paul Riley went to Hogwarts at one point and has a few magic spells in his pocket that he will occasionally hit one of the players with a spell to do magic. Because the way that the Courage are, yes, Sam Ewis is different than, midfielder number 2 or 3 in that lineup. But when the Courage are sort of clicking, you can trade players in and out, and you can move people around, and you can do things that feel like they shouldn't work. And on North Carolina, with Paul Riley at the helm, they sort of make a little bit of magic. And I don't think that can be undersold of how much that team seems to believe in the Kool-Aid that Paul Riley is making every week.
You know, there's some people out there who would have looked at the Amy Rodriguez trade and said, why is Amy Rodriguez going to North Carolina?
She also won the title.
Well, you and I, who knew Amy Rodriguez when she was playing in Philadelphia for Paul Riley, knew why she was going to North Carolina, because she can play for Paul Riley plenty well. And indeed, she is playing for Paul Riley plenty well.
Yeah, and you see somebody like Amy Rodriguez, who she's closer to the end of the career than she obviously is to the beginning. She wants to win another title, and North Carolina is a place that she can do it. It also gives them another weapon up front. She is very different than Lynn Williams or Just McDonald or any of their other attacking players. So it's fun to sort of see Paul Riley have about 7 different paintbrushes, and whatever he needs to paint with that day, he can sort of pull it out. And he's managed to get different styles working together in a way that I don't necessarily think sort of on first blush go together.
In third place are OL Reign, and they might be a little higher even by the time all is said and done, the way things are going. And when they had Portland in Seattle a couple of weeks ago, we'd all been asking ourselves for a while, okay, what's going to happen when they put Rose Lavelle, Jennifer Marijan, Jessica Fishlock, Megan Rapinoe, and Eugenie Lissamé all on the field at the same time? Are they going to win? And the answer was, yeah, they did. They went out and beat the Thorns. So they can play, and we're starting to see now, I think, what happens when this all finally comes together.
Yeah, and I think that Laura Harvey being back is super interesting, right? She is somebody who intimately knows the NWSL. She has coached in it, except for her time with U.S. Soccer, since 2013. And one of her greatest strengths is the fact that she is very good at managing a lot of very strong personalities. And the one thing you can say about the Reign right now is they have a lot of personalities. Getting Megan Rapinoe and Rose Lavelle and Marijan and Lissamé and all of these players on the same page, and it's not the Megan Rapinoe show or the Rose Lavelle show or, you know, the Mara show, like having them all working together is not as easy as one might think, because they're each superstars in their own right. And being able to balance that and being able to get people, you know, role players in to do their job without them feeling like, you know, the team is slipping away and they don't have a shot. That is a talent. And Laura Harvey has shown in the past she is very good at that. And she obviously has the players' support and respect and trust. You know, seeing the reactions of Fishlock and Lou Barnes and everything when she came back, these players genuinely have a great relationship with her, and the newer players seem to as well. And I think that's going to help the Reign. You know, you can quibble with her tactics at times, but Laura Harvey knows how to manage personalities on a team that you need to know how to manage personalities with that payroll.
You know, it's interesting. It takes something to make Jessica Fishlock into a 6, because she is very not a 6.
Yeah.
One of the things, you know, in fact, Laura Harvey taking the helm was one of the things that happened while the show was on hiatus. Fareed Ben-Stidi resigned on July 2nd, just a few days after our last show, and Laura Harvey came in. And I'm not going to ask you to betray too many things that you don't want to, but for folks who haven't figured out out yet over all the years that RJ's been doing this, she knows a lot of things and she knows a lot of people, and that's why she's so good at it. So I thought that Fareed Ben-Stidi was not a half bad manager, that his players seemed to like him, or so they said whenever we asked. He got the short end of the stick in a few ways, and clearly something happened where he had to go. I get that. But again, I don't want to get you in too much trouble, but was my perception that the players liked Ben-Stidi? Was that wrong?
I think that City is sort of a place and time that is not America in 2021. And I don't necessarily think that they didn't like him. I think the problem was they didn't like him a lot. And, being able to be cordial, being able to, work under a coach is different than really liking a coach and believing that they know how to get you there. And I don't think the players believed that Ben Steedy could figure it out. I think they gave him a decent amount of time. It wasn't like, you have 5 weeks to turn this team around or you're canned. Like, he had a decent amount of time. I think the players thought he was fine. I just don't think, Jess Fishlock and Laura Harvey have a bond that you can't break. And when you're used to that, and when you have that for years, and a lot of the Reign core is still there, I think then, Vlatko comes in and he's somebody who you super respect in the league, and the players have talked about how much you respect him. And then you go to somebody who is completely different. And I think that complete difference seemed to have been a big issue, because I don't necessarily think they hated him. And from what I have heard, they didn't hate him. It just was a matter of, he is not of the place and time that these players are sort of used to. Make of that what you will.
No, I get it. I get it. Next is Orlando. Under somebody who more than half the league has changed managers since the last one of our shows. So this is going to be a recurring theme. Teams have changed managers and teams are in messes. Those are the themes of tonight's broadcast, as the saying goes. Mark Skinner left Orlando for Manchester United, which raised a few eyebrows over here. He seems to have not changed his temperament at Manchester United all that much, which is to say, sir, you can talk a big game, but you got to go out and win every once in a while. And Orlando's manager now is Becky Burley, who has the job on an interim basis, has been without Alex Morgan because she's dealing with a calf injury, but has had obviously plenty of other good players. They went up to Gotham and won last weekend, a game I was at. And I think I want to alight on this with Becky Burley, because she is on a list of coaches who I think should have been in this league a long time ago. I think she should have been the Pride's inaugural manager back in the day. But college coaches don't come up to the NWSL, because when they do, they generally, the best ones, take very big pay cuts. And that is a problem that this league needs to solve. And it needs to solve it fairly soon, I think. Not tomorrow. It needs to solve it soon enough so that it develops Vlatko Ananovsky's successor, which I'm not currently convinced it's going to do. And I'm not calling for Vlatko to be fired, thank you, before everybody who wants him out starts wondering why I've changed my tune. I've written pretty forcefully that I don't think he should go. I think he was hired for the Olympics and then to overhaul the roster afterward. But in fact, he was hired to overhaul the roster afterward. So this is now what he's going to do, and let him do it. Back to Becky Burley. Becky Burley is in a class of coaches in college with Amanda Cromwell at UCLA, Erica Dombach at Penn State, and a few others who I think should be moving up to the NWSL right about now. Erica Dombach, for example, I think should be, in 3 or 4 years, the next head coach of the U.S. women, whether it is during 2027 or after. But if she's the manager of the U.S. team in 2031 on home soil, that would make a lot of sense to me as things stand at the moment. But Cromwell, for example, we know makes $240,000 at UCLA. That's a matter of public record, folks. I'm not betraying anything because UCLA is a public institution. So Amanda Cromwell is a public employee. Therefore, her salary is out there. And she knows that. Amanda Cromwell's not going to make $240,000 in the NWSL coaching Angel City or anybody else. So it's not all that surprising that Becky Burley did not take the Pride job until she had retired from the University of Florida and had to be convinced by Amanda Duffy to come over to Orlando to manage the Pride, which is a long way of saying, RJ, something you have made the point plenty often. We got a problem here.
Yeah, I think there are a couple of problems. First, and probably not the easiest to fix, but easier of the two to fix, is the coaching pipeline. We're getting to a place where more players are taking coaching, licensing, and they're doing more coaching sort of through the tree. Now, in a perfect world, how it works is you have assistant coaches, and as head coaching jobs come up, you have 5 or 6 assistant coaches who are all qualified to be head coaches, apply for a job, and most of your coaches are former assistant coaches. That is sort of how it works in most other sports leagues. And then you have occasionally somebody brought up from college or from another league or how have you. But getting more former players, getting more people who are qualified in assistant coaching roles who are not, oh, I coached a men's U17 team for a while or different things like that, I think is really going to help finding qualified people. Because one of the problems right now is there are not a lot of qualified people sort of ready to go that are former players. And I think that is a big deal. So I think that is something that we see starting to getting the coaching licenses starting to change, or at least potentially can change. Soccer is one of those weird sports where you need a coaching license. Most other sports are like, you're a former player, you're going to be my assistant coach. Awesome. So soccer is a little bit weird there. And the second is, like you talked about, the money is not being willingly spent on going out and getting a big name head coach. Now, I don't know what Paul Riley makes, but I'm guessing it's probably a pretty decent salary. He's not on an NWSL minimum player salary, right? Like, he's making good money. Now it becomes this thing of, if he was, to go, Vincent Dorrance retires, right? And he goes coach UCLA and makes, say, $200,000. That's probably more than he makes. Now, I don't think Paul Riley wants the overturn every couple of years. I think he likes to ride players out a little more than that. But yeah, I think that the problem becomes, if these coaches are making more money in college, if it's more stable in college, because you don't see a lot of the big programs turning their coaches over because they can get the best players. So they have a better player pool. And it's, like I said, it's a different mentality. College coaches get to recruit. They get to turn their roster over every year or every couple of years, where in the NWSL, if you're, Kansas City, next year, you might not be infinitely better the way you can if you bring in a great freshman class. Yes, you have the draft, you have other mechanisms, but it's a different thing than going out and recruiting. If you can convince the number one, high school player to come to your program, you can have that versus, if you're pick number 7, moving up in the draft pool is a lot more difficult potentially. So I think there's a couple of things at play, sort of the drawing the coaches in and then having that organic pool. I think we sort of need both prongs to fix the problem. Unfortunately, the first one is not quick, and the second one requires money.
And there will always be college coaches, as there are in college basketball, as there are in college football, and everywhere else, who don't want to coach in the pros for any number of reasons. There are many famous examples in men's college basketball in my neck of the woods here in Philadelphia, including Jay Wright at Villanova, who is going into the Naismith Hall of Fame in a few days up in Springfield, Massachusetts. And they're, in college football and women's college basketball too. Obviously, Gino Auriemma, Pat Summitt, lots of others have never left the college ranks. And in the WNBA, you would make enough money to for it to be worth it. I was talking with somebody recently who's in our business in the soccer world, who said, the stability, as you mentioned, RJ, is very appealing. Erica Dombak's not going to get fired. Amanda Cromwell did get fired because she was caught in the scandal. But I don't remember actually whether she got fired, but they're Anson Dorrance, Erica Dombak, lots of Janet Rayfield, who was at Illinois for a long time, is a great example. Becky Burley was another. There's stability in those jobs. You're not going to get fired. You have a life. You buy a house. You raise a family. You get in-house tuition, et cetera. Lots of great things, for sure. But I'm pretty sure that if the money was high enough in NWSL manager jobs, of course, a lot of these folks want to coach in the pros someday, and they would do it.
Yeah, I think that the hard thing for owners is the investment in a coach, right? Because if you can get a decent coach for we'll say $40,000 in most of these markets. Why would you pay $150,000 for a great coach? There are a lot of clubs that $90,000, like they don't want to spend that $90,000 because, well, I want to spend not maybe as little as possible to run my team, but I don't want to break the bank to run my team. And I think player investment and coaching investment sort of shows that the league might not be as mature as the league thinks it is.
I wonder if the day will arrive sometime when the NWSL is at the point where MLS was for a while, and in some cases still is, where team owners would rather spend big money on a coach who thinks that they can make cheap players good instead of the other way around. Your point about the NWSL's growth and maturity.
Well, we just saw a coach go from Gotham to Angel City. I'm assuming there's a pretty substantial pay raise.
Yeah.
Because coaching in, the New Jersey, New York area and coaching in LA, like those are two very large markets. Now, LA seems to be throwing all of the money in the world, both in NFTs and Kristen Press
and
fines
coaching
to the league,
which we'll discuss
and
later.
Fines to the league. But there's a pay raise, we would imagine there, right? And that's how you're going to have to lure coaches. If you're offering a coach to go from, say, Chicago to Houston on the same pay, they might not want to do that, even though it's the same league where, you double the pay and you might get the coach you want and you get the benefit of somebody who knows the league. And if you think they're good, then it might be worth it. But owners have to be willing to spend money. And the NWSL has a history of owners kind of being cheap.
We will alight upon Gotham FC in a few minutes. When we get there,
Yes.
As we make our way to the standings, we might stay there, in fact, a little bit too. The Chicago Red Stars are up next, currently in 5th place as we record. And in yours, I have a flaw of mine when I do these podcasts is that I throw to the guest in the form of a declarative sentence instead of the form of a question, which is how I'm supposed to do it. So I'll do it right this time and throw it to you, RJ, in the form of a question. What do you think of the Chicago Red Stars?
I think the Chicago Red Stars are about as middling as you can get right now. They are not a bad soccer team. I unfortunately think that Rory Dames is just not the correct coach for that club anymore. I think Rory Dames is not a bad coach, but the problem is all of the extra Rory Dames has been able to get off of that roster in years past. The last couple of years, it seems like he can't eke out anymore. And I think that's one of the great tragedies of having, the DiBernardo and the Colaprico midfield for so many years is he was able to have them play above their sort of hitting weight, and it just not happening anymore between injury and just them not playing sort of above their levels and all of that. So I think Rory Dames is the problem, and also the reason they're in 5th in sort of a weird way is they need a different coach. Even if they take a dip for a little while before that coach can sort of build in their style.
They might also need a big gun. I'm not going to name any big guns because you get in trouble when you name big guns about Chicago Red Stars, don't you?
This is true.
No, they need a big gun because the top teams in the league have big guns and they go win things, and they tend to beat the Red Stars at some point along the way because of that. And that comes down on Arnim Whistler and whether he wants a big gun. But to your point about Rory Dames, the Chicago Red Stars are a team where culture tends to, or so we are told, matter a lot and create results and all of these other things. And you're going to say, well, I don't want somebody who's not going to fit the culture. And my response to that, as somebody who's dealt a lot with teams over the years that seem to say, oh, we're going to win games because of culture, I'm going to say, no, you want a big gun, so you go out and win a trophy. I'm sorry. Is that fair?
I mean, Chicago has historically done pretty well with big guns, right? They had Kristen Press for several years. They had Sam Kerr for, I believe, a pair of seasons, and they did well. They got into the final one of those years. They got Kristen Press was 3 inches away from beating North Carolina the year that Chicago headed to North Carolina for a semi. So Chicago has historically done well when they have a forward who likes to score goals. The problem is that if they rely only on having an excellent midfield and one great forward. When that one great forward has a bad game, Chicago historically has not been able to find another way to win.
We will come now to the Washington Spirit, and this is unfortunately a team that we are going to spend a lot of time on. Look, I don't think I have to tell the audience of this show. I don't have to rehash the facts generally of what has happened. But I am going, for those who are not fully aware of all of the details, the key story that has been written in all of this came on August 30th from Molly Hensley Clancy and Steve Goff of the Washington Post about how Michelle Kang, who is one of the part owners of the Spirit, is fighting to get Steve Baldwin tossed out. Steve Baldwin, who hired Richie Burke because Burke was his daughter's youth club coach. And it was revealed that Burke, for all his efforts to be a nice guy, was in fact creating an abusive work environment, as were the men above him in the hierarchy, which ran a number of players off. I think we can now say on the record that Kaya McCullough was one of them. Yes. That's been said on the record. Alienated a number of players, ran them off, caused a toxic environment. The buck stops with Steve Baldwin. He has seen to it that buck comes from a defense contractor. Not the first time that a sports team in Washington has done that. Here's what I will say about that as somebody who grew up there. There is a lot of money in the defense contracting business in the Washington area. I am 37, and there has been for all 37 years of my life. If you want big money from the private sector in Washington to fund your sports team, that's where it is. From there, it depends how much of a deal with the devil you're willing to make. Steve Baldwin evidently does not mind making deals with the devil in a number of different ways, I think it's fair to say. Including how he hired his manager, which then blew up on him. And again, the fact that Richie Burke is a loudmouth, and a profane loudmouth at that, and that's not going to go over very well with people who haven't known him for 20 years, is really no surprise. And I know that a number of people who follow me on Twitter know that I have known of Richie Burke since I was in high school when he was yelling at me when I was the ball boy on the sidelines for my high school's girls soccer games. He has always been a loud. Some people take to that better than others. I'm not excusing to bit what he did. I'm saying I'm surprised. And the times, as you said earlier on this show, the times have changed. And people are not so willing to be coached by a profane loudmouth anymore. And if you're one of the people out there who sometimes these people email me every once in a while, and they say that these people need to buck up and so on. Well, there are some environments where the players are willing to be coached that way. I don't think we should deny that. But it's not the way it used to be. It's certainly not like that now in women's soccer to a much greater degree than it's ever been before. And the players have stood up for themselves and said, hey, we want to play professional soccer. We want to work hard. We want to play hard. We want to play well. And we want to win games. But we'd rather not be treated poorly. Thank you. And we'd rather be treated by somebody who understands our lives and is a little more sympathetic to us. Thank you. And so so Richie Burke goes. Steve Baldwin has not gone yet. Do I think he might? Do RJ and I both think he might? I think I can safely say, yes, we do. It's a matter of when, and maybe we can alight on that here for a moment, RJ, because we should attempt to figure out how that might happen.
Oh, where to start? I think at some point within the next month, he's gone. And I don't think it's necessarily going to be willingly. I don't think he will do anything willingly that makes his ego feel like it is being disrespected, because some of the last week has been his own doing. Salvatine Steve is a relatively small banner that would have gotten, maybe 100, maybe 200 likes on Twitter, some retweets, and he turned it into at least one Washington Post piece, retweets by national media, like all of these things, by simply not being able to have that sign up. The Rose Room Collected had a banner up, for those who don't know. He wanted it taken down. There was a police officer hiding out of sight. This is a predominantly people of color supporters group. And that is not great optics, whether you're in Washington, D.C. or whether you're in any other stadium. So I think that Steve Baldwin is sort of his own undoing, which a lot of the people connected to Washington seem. In some of the statements lately, people have forgotten Bill Lynch is still an owner of the team. A smaller portion than he used to be, but he's still involved. And it seems to be like Washington never really has had to clean house. They've just sort of gussied up the front walk and have been able to skirt by. And I think this might actually be the systemic change that Washington needs, if the NWSL is willing to do that. And that's my biggest question. And my question back to you is, do you think the NWSL is willing to take the steps on a team like Washington, where there is history and there is eyes on it, versus something like a Utah, where it was easy to just move them back to Kansas City and sort of pretend that it never happened?
I think they are willing. I think there are definitely people around the league in positions of power who are willing. I don't know if Lisa Baird is one of them. And I don't say that to impugn Lisa Baird before anybody jumps on me about that. I genuinely don't know, because I haven't been able to ask her. I would like to. I hope to have the opportunity to one of these days. I'm sure all of us in the media would like to have that opportunity, but I have not had the opportunity to ask her about that situation yet. So from that, I know of people in power who are in the process of trying to make it so that Baldwin is gone. We know that Michelle Kang and Baldwin had discussions for Baldwin to sell the team to Kang, which he then backed out. What I don't know, and I don't know if these rules are public because this is the NWSL. I also haven't had the time to look them up. They may well be public. So if they are, somebody will let me know. I don't know how one forces an owner out of this league from league headquarters. If you are Major League Soccer or the NFL or Major League Baseball or the NBA or whatever, you probably have a bag of cash in a closet in a safe that you can use to buy a bad owner out with and get him out and sit on the asset of the franchise until you can find somebody to buy it, who then replenishes the bag of cash in the safe and the debts and whatever else. I'm not sure the NWSL as an entity has that cash on hand right now.
Yeah, I feel like they would have to borrow it or do a loan from U.S. Soccer potentially, which U.S. Soccer may have their own reservations for a deal like that.
I would imagine that borrowing it from a commercial institution would be the way to do it. But that's, again, I also think, the league, I'm trying to think of whether or not the league has operated a franchise yet.
I think in technicality, they operated Kansas City for like 2 days.
Okay.
Either coming or going, but they've never long-term operated a franchise. It's not like the, MLS when they were operating a franchise. I believe that's right. Yes. I know you will be able to tell me.
They have done that. I forget which one it was, but it was a while ago, but they have done it. The people are comparing this situation to the Utah Royals. I actually think the comparison might well be the old Kansas City situation.
Yeah. I don't think the NWSL has staff, resources, or the ability to run a franchise. I think if something like this were to happen, where they need to borrow the money to buy out Baldwin and potentially Lynch as well. I think what likely would happen would be they would use the money and then they would have Kang actually run the team, or somebody that Kang appointed running the team. I don't think the NWSL is willing or able to do it themselves in terms of being able to approve things and things like that.
And I will say one other thing for people who've brought up the Utah situation. And here is why Kansas City is the comp. Because the NWSL the NWSL office had to be directly involved in booting out the Kansas City owners twice, as it turned out.
Yeah.
The NWSL did not actually boot out Deloy Hansen. Major League Soccer booted out Deloy Hansen and forced him to sell the whole holding company that included the Utah Royals. The NWSL didn't technically have to force him to do anything, as far as I know.
Right. And then Kansas City got the team, and the holding company got a franchise for 2023 if they wanted it.
Right. And we'll see what comes of that. But that's just a little history lesson for folks out there listening who might not have been following the NWSL for its entire history. So, as we were about to start recording this show, the news came down from the Spirit that they have hired Ben Olsen to be the team's top executive. This club president is the technical name. I've known Ben Olsen for a long time. There are very few people in the history of soccer in Washington who are more respected in that town by the soccer fan base. He'd be a great asset for any professional soccer team of any stripe in the Washington area, especially as somebody who might well be a public-facing figure to a great degree. I don't know that I would have hired him to this job. I think he is in potentially an unwinnable situation. Obviously, there are diversity issues in relating to the hiring of a white guy who was sitting around without a job, who happened to be close friends with one of the part owners for a long time, and an investor in that guy's defense contracting company, although I will bet that the amount of money that Olsen put in was very small at the time, because when he was manager of DC United in 2015, he wasn't making all that much, and he was trying to raise a family living in the city. He's a very, very politically liberal person, one of the most politically active managers in Major League Soccer history. And I think that Spirit fans who don't know that yet will learn that hopefully soon if Steve Baldwin lets Olsen talk freely, which I hope he does, and I should know better than to hope that. RJ, I wouldn't have hired him. And I wonder what you think of the situation.
I think that Ben Olsen is in an unwinnable situation because nobody from the fan base, I think, is going to give him the time of day, which you put somebody in this because you want to win over the fans. You want them to say, hey, I know that name if I'm a Spirit fan. This is somebody I like. This is, I've seen a couple of people on Twitter who feel conflicted and they have his jersey hanging in their closet. And it becomes this thing where you're trying to buy that loyalty. But I think because you're putting another straight white guy into a position, there are people who are going to see that. They're going to see he was friends with one of the owners, and it does not matter what policies or positions he put in. Now, is that fair or not? I'm not going to litigate somebody's personal feelings on this, but what I will say is I think that rushing to put somebody in, and I do feel like this is a rush by the ownership, rushing to put somebody in without even going through the motions of we're going to interview candidates, we're going to talk to women, we're going to talk to other people, we're going to, learn from our mistakes. I think they're not even going through the process of the show and, Ben was the best person for the job.
Right.
And I think that's part of the problem is that the Spirit ownership don't seem to actually want to even pretend that they care. They just want Baldwin just wants this as an ego project. And Kang may or may not have the money to do this on her own. It seems like she probably can't do it solely on her own. And if she can't do it with some of her own people, and getting the money together, then I think this gets messy. When you have an owner who can just buy out the other owners without, blinking an eye, that's one thing. But when you have sort of an ownership fight where nobody has all of the money to be able to do this, things get a lot messier. And when you have one owner putting somebody in without the other sort of major owner knowing, and then that becomes even a bigger problem. Yeah,
that's what I was going to get to. The Washington Post reported that Michelle Kang did not know about this. Steve Baldwin went around her. That is blazing red light sirens, all of it,
Yeah.
And I question a couple other bits of this that I'll try to handle quickly. To your point earlier, you said you're not sure how the soccer fans are going to react. I think a number of the soccer fans in Washington are going to like this. Are the women's soccer fans / women's sports fans who don't follow soccer writ large, are they going to much care? I don't know. I've noticed that some of the reaction against him, certainly in my mentions, has come from outside of the Washington area. Understandably, I'm not saying anything wrong. I'm just happened to observe that. I also noticed the timing, and this is going to be a little inside baseball media stuff on my part. They announced this on a day when Steve Goff is in San Salvador, El Salvador, covering the U.S. men's game, national team's first game in World Cup qualifying. The extreme conspiracy theorist in me, who really probably shouldn't say this on the record, but the Spirit are at a point where they have so little benefit of the doubt that I'm going to throw it out there. The conspiracy theorist would like some reassurance that they did not time this announcement to a point when Steve wasn't around and was focusing on other things and might be able to slip it by and have somebody else write it who wasn't paying closer attention. As it turns out, you can't do that because he's paying attention even from down there 4 hours before kickoff in a stadium that opened. We're recording this at just about 8 o'clock, 2 hours before kickoff in San Salvador. The stadium gates will have been opened, I believe, for 8.5 hours by the time, more than that, 9.5 hours. By the time the game kicks off, when you're on the road covering the U.S. men, you are in the door and sat in the press box long before kickoff as a security measure. Are you trying to get around some people by announcing it at 5 o'clock on game day? I hope not. It's my outlandish conspiracy theory, RJ, and I know you're always one for outlandish conspiracy theories. Feel free to tell me if I'm wrong, but
I mean, I don't know if it was specifically aimed at golf, but I do think there is something to it, right? Of people are going to focus on the men. The DC area, has a long history of supporting the men's national team. It doesn't strike me as unrealistic that they were like, well, if everybody's focusing over here, we're going to just slip out this press release. We'll put a couple nice quotes in. Everybody likes everybody likes Ben. So we'll be fine, right? Yeah. And it's easy. Now, have NWSL clubs put out information during the Olympics and when the U.S. women's national team play, hoping that somebody won't cover it? Absolutely. So using the men's national team at cover doesn't seem like that much of a stretch to me.
And it's, of course, a compliment to Steve Goff, who's one of the best in the business, has been for a long time, that you would try to pull that on him. Okay, let's let the people breathe for a minute. We're going to take a quick commercial break before we come back and discuss Gotham and the rest of the league. This is the Women's Soccer Review here on the Sports Podcasting Network. It is great to be back, and we'll be back in just a moment. Welcome back to the Women's Soccer Review here on the Sports Podcasting Network. Jonathan Tannenwald of the Philadelphia Inquirer with RJ Allen of Backline Soccer and the Internet at Large. We are making our way slowly through the NWSL standings, reviewing the goings-on with each team, and we have now come to Gotham FC, which is the team that I know the best. and have been covering quite a bit lately, as you all have seen, to the point where I got some emails from people asking me why I had stopped covering the Philadelphia Union to go cover Gotham FC. And the answer is I have not stopped covering the Philadelphia Union. Thank you. But I cover more than one soccer team. I cover many of them at once, and Gotham is one of them. In the time since our last show, Elise LaHue was fired as general manager. We don't know very much about why, except that the league, according to Equalizer Soccer, and we all believe it, opened an investigation into her about harassment charges, which then led to her departure.
Yeah.
We will leave it at that for now. They have not hired, they have hired, well, I was about to say they have not hired a replacement general manager. And here's what I mean by that. They have hired Yael Averbuch West on an interim basis. It took until this week, as we are recording this on Thursday, it was earlier this week that I was probably the first person who had the opportunity to ask her, do you want the job full time? And she does. And we'll see if she gets it. You'd think at the rate she's going, she probably will. So now we get to Freya Coombe, who took the Angel City job after Elise LaHue had given Angel City permission to interview her, which may or may not have been above board. Might get into that. We can get in a little now. There is ample precedent for coaches to sign pre-contracts, for teams to get permission to interview a coach whose contract is expiring for a future job. However, there were people who thought that Freya could stay on for the rest of the year and it would be just fine. Well, no, she can't. Because it's not like German soccer. It's not like the NFL. You are coaching players whom you might take in an expansion draft and whose stock in said expansion draft you might affect by how much or how little you play them. So Freya Coombe had to go, and ultimately she did. And nobody really had any idea as to who was going to replace her until to the point where I went to the Gotham Houston game on Sunday, which was Freya Coombe's last game. And McCall Zerboni gave it to us pretty straight, as I pull up the quote here. I want to be transparent. It's been really, really difficult. It's been an emotional roller coaster, and it's been a very uneven environment off the field, and we're all just trying to navigate it and figure it out and deal with the news and deal with the anxiety of what's to come and the changes that we're going through. And I walked out of Red Bull Arena saying publicly, because it was a fact, Gotham FC is not going to have a manager tomorrow in the middle of the season. And a bunch of people told me, we're in the process. It'll be fine. It'll be announced in 2 days. Sure. Great. And it was announced on Tuesday. It was fine. But in the middle of the season, they didn't have a manager. And that, I think that's allowed to stand on its face for a minute and illustrate some of the absurdities of what's been going on here.
The weird thing about Gotham is there is more than one owner, but one of the owners is the current governor of New Jersey. Mm-hmm. And it seems like because of how Gotham is structured, the owners themselves don't really want to be public facing. You look at a team like Chicago, everybody knows who the owner is, right? You look at Angel City, everybody knows who the main owner is there. Obviously at Washington, you know who the owner is, whether you want him to continue in the job or not. But with Gotham, it's been LaHue, right? She, as the GM, has been the face of that team. And I think when you don't have an owner that's very present, when you don't have sort of a president of soccer or something like that, when your GM, whatever other titles they have, is sort of the main face, when that person is gone, justified or not, should be or not, people are going to be confused, and they're going to feel like if you're not putting out information, that there's something perhaps worse, perhaps better going on, because they don't know. So they're going to go on Twitter and they're going to search for a LaHue, and they're going to see all these wild conspiracy theories ranging from she eats babies to she's one of the lizard people that Queen Elizabeth has planted in the US for, nefarious reasons. And they're going to pick one that they like and they're going to run with it. And that has been in my Twitter mentions for the last 3 weeks. But it becomes this thing where if the clubs aren't putting out information, and it seems in this case it's because of legal reasons, which we'll get to in a few minutes for other legal reasons, it becomes something where there's that information vacuum. And I think LaHue sort of being forced out, and then Freya Coombe leaving of her own volition to take a different job, is a hard thing for fans, whether you're a fan of Gotham or the NWSL at large, to take. Now, they made the smartest move possible by bringing in Avery Bush-West, because she is somebody who has been incredibly online, who has been incredibly in touch with fans, who is really, really smart about soccer, and who is thoughtful, and who has sort of shared her life with her dog and her kid and the husband. And it's been good because people trust her. So I think if you're going to sort of have LaHue leave, and you're going to have Coop leave, and you're going to have everybody else leave, bringing her in is really great. Sort of without the different changing coaching, and without the assistant coach that they brought in, who Jacob Cristobal during her playing days named the Sunshine Assassin, which is still my favorite nickname in the league. Jacob Cristobal out of Seattle did that. So shout out there. But yeah, I think that there is a giant mess in Gotham, and we'll see if it gets healed with sort of the new people in new positions.
The interesting thing about Yale Avery Bush-West is that she was basically down the street. And they got a little lucky in that regard, I think. She's always cared very deeply about the organization. That is for sure.
Her mom was with the team for years, I think, on the administrative side as well. Plus, she played for them.
Right. She started her pro career there. And she's from Montclair, New Jersey, which is, you want to talk about the heart of the New Jersey women's soccer landscape. Montclair pretty well nails it. And they hired Scott Parkinson, which is a universally applauded hire.
I was surprised by that, to be completely honest. I was expecting a lot more pushback than I saw.
I was reasons. Too. I was too. But,
yeah.
And, I was one of the reporters who got, the tip in advance and the exclusive interview before the announcement and so on, which was great. And Scott was terrific, and Bev was terrific. And Yal I've known for a long time. And obviously you mentioned her husband. As celebrity women's soccer fans go, Aaron West, who a number of you all know of, is very much on the list. He's just been over in Venice, Italy, where unfortunately he did not bring us all back Venezia jerseys as I had hoped he would. I kept hearing from players and coaches alike at Gotham, I think we're going to be okay. And sometimes I'm too cynical and I didn't believe it, but they might actually be okay, even though Parkinson, now he's not going to coach his first game on the bench until the 25th of September, because it's funny, the Gotham's first game since they hired him is against the Red Stars on Saturday. But Parkinson was always going to miss that game because he has a family commitment, a funeral in the family to go to. It's his first head coaching job. That is a rare example, as we alluded to earlier, of an assistant coach moving up the pipeline. And a lot of people are very happy for him, and we will see how he does, and Bev Yanez does, and Becky Tweed is staying on the staff, which will make one of our former guests on the show, Sylvain Jamet, very, very happy. He knows her pretty well. We'll see how they do with a team that, as I wrote, has got a lot of veterans and a lot of young folks. It's the right mix. If somebody can put it together, they can get going and go on a run. They can shoot right up the table. And I don't think any of us would be surprised, RJ, if that happens.
No, I'm confident enough to say I could see them hosting a playoff game if they're able to put it all together. If everybody can get healthy and get back, I think they have all the parts. The Parkinson's hire is interesting to me because, like we said, we don't get many assistant coaches moving up, and he, unlike a lot of assistant coaches, usually if you see it moving up, people are generally happy. Players were almost writing love letters to him, not in sort of a very organic, very like, you have been a great coach, I wish you luck sort of way. We've seen it. Chicago players, former players, I believe he was in Utah for a while, players there were writing about it. And I think he just genuinely comes off as a nice person who loves his job, loves soccer, and who is very sort of well received. And it's nice when good things happen to good people, right?
Yeah.
Like you and I are maybe more of the cynical members of the WOSO media cabal, but we are not so cynical that when a good thing happens to a good person, we are not happy for it. So I saw that, or I heard of it the night before it was going to drop, and I was just happy that a good thing happened to somebody with, knock wood, but no scandals attached.
Yeah.
He hasn't like buried an old person in a room somewhere like it's a episode of Stranger Things. So I'm happy that a good thing happened to a seemingly good person, and having ex-players come in as assistant coaches, as Yanez is doing, is excellent. She is a very fun person. And I got to interview her back many, many years ago when I first started this, and it was a great experience. So I'm happy to see her back.
And Scott Parkinson, a guy with a real social conscience, as we saw when he stood up for Sarah Gordon. And I asked him about that, and I'll read you what he said. What we're doing to improve the world, to improve our communities here in the United States, across the country, is way bigger than football. Football is just the platform. I'll pause here to note, by the way, he's from Liverpool. He's got a thick Scouse accent that I cannot replicate, so I will not try to. And he said, as a privileged white man who come to this country and was given everything because I had an accent and I could play soccer okay, I've seen what I've been able to have and achieve that others haven't, and it breaks my heart. That's not a turn of phrase you hear often on the record from all that many people. In the context of race, in the context of class, or in the context of the simple old story that a lot of English folks come over here and make money teaching young American kids like me back in the day. I was one of them, how to run around and kick a soccer ball.
Yeah, he seems to be a good mix for that team. You have, players like Purse and others who are very socially active. And, one of my favorite images, I think, to ever come out of women's soccer is Megan Rapinoe and Midge Purse sitting in the president's chair. And it's one of those things like, women's soccer has come a long way in many years. And I think he's somebody, especially for New Jersey, New York, I think he will fit in well. And there's also, enough places where he can go and hear familiar accents from home in the city. Yes. So I think he'll be right at home.
There are no small number of places in Manhattan where you can be an Everton fan. That's for sure. I even know a couple of them because I've got a very good friend who lives in New York who is an Everton fan. We come to the Houston Dash, about which we will not have as much to say, for perhaps the better in this case.
Yeah.
As Gotham and Washington and some of the others. I think I wondered every once in a while what their ambitions were. And they showed some hints of it in the way they played Barcelona and took a lead on them at one point. And now they've gone out and signed Abby Dahlkemper. And I know it's only going to be for, not no. I've heard, I'm inclined to believe, we're all inclined to believe because they've said it's only going to be for a few months. But that's a move to me that has a little bit of ambition in it.
For what it's worth, I emailed the Houston Dash and asked directly, is this a loan or is this a trade? And they said, in black and white writing, this is a trade and any further questions need to be referred to the league. And it was one of those like, oh, so it's a trade with a little asterisk that you didn't put next to the trade. One of the reasons they had to call it a trade is because per NWSL restrictions, you can't have one NWSL club loan a player to another NWSL club. So I'm very interested. We will never see the language that they put in to make this happen, but I would be very interested to see the language put in to make this happen. Because per NWSL rules, it should not. But anyway, I think Houston is a team that when they play their best soccer, they are fun and exciting and do really cool things. And when they cool off, they go ice cold. There is no barely acceptable Houston dash. They are at a 10 or they are at a 2. And I think that Houston has always had a little bit of that. I just think that it seems to be turned up in an Olympic year where they lost Mewis and Bailey and all of the Canadians. So unfortunately, I think they suffered from they're super fun and super dynamic unless they cool off. And then it seems like if one player has a cooling off period, everybody follows. They're good friends like that.
You know, the only thing I will add is that this is another one of those examples where really the NWSL does not have to follow the Major League Soccer roster rules book to the square inch. Because the rule that you can't loan a player between clubs in the league in a single entity operation was MLS's rule for a long time until the league got so big and the teams actually wanted to do things that they scrapped the rule. And I would imagine that the NWSL will scrap this rule too ultimately, because too many of the clubs are going to be able to want to do this. So it's, you know, if she gets traded back for exactly the same amount of allocation money for which she was traded, then we won't know, although we keep hearing that there's something big and more substantive to it. We'll see. All right. Are we ready for Louisville?
Oh, is anybody ready for Louisville without a big thing of bourbon next to them? And I only have a beer, so we'll see if we can get through this, Jonathan.
I am not drinking alcohol during this. I don't drink alcohol on the air. I am of lesser constitution than you and some of your colleagues. I admire those of you who are able to do all of this in that manner. So, Christy Holly is out. Fired. For cause was the key turn of phrase. Which means you cannot sue us to get your job back. That's why you say for cause. WDRB, the Fox affiliate in Louisville, which I believe it is, reported that some players complained about a, quote, toxic environment, end quote, they allege was fostered by the coach as well as other potential improprieties. You and I and a few other people in our business have heard some things over the last few months that we cannot say on the record because either we are forsworn from saying them on the record, or in my case, look, I've heard them, but that doesn't mean I know them. So I'm not going to say them. None of us are surprised that Christy Holly was fired. We're a few of us still wondering why he was hired in the first place. And the only thing we think we're sure of as it relates to the turn of phrase for cause, i.e., don't sue me to get your job back over wrongful termination, is it was not about the whole GPS youth soccer visa scandal that Holly was part of. We think the toxic environment had more to do it. And at some point, I assume that somebody will report out what happened. I don't know when. But I will now turn to somebody who was even less surprised than I was that Christy Holly was fired. And in fact, that is our guest, RJL.
So when I read the statement, Christy Holly was fired for cause, the problem is like 3 or 4 things sprung to mind that could be the cause. And anytime somebody who lives, say, 1,000 miles away from your club can just sprout off 3 or 4 things that you may have done is not really a great one. Full disclosure, I knew Christy Holly back when he coached Sky Blue. I talked to him many times. He's a perfectly lovely person. And he is one of those coaches that does not seem to have a filter if he is talking to somebody that he enjoys speaking with. And I always seem to be somebody he enjoyed speaking with. So this is one of those situations where I have to be as careful as Jonathan. But it is not surprising. I don't think anybody in the media was surprised by this. I don't think most fans were surprised by this. Holly seems to have a character flaw of just not knowing when he's gotten himself in too deep. And that seems to be what got him this time. I don't think it would be remiss to say Louisville was not happy with their performance on the field. And he was a big part of that, some of his decisions, some of his setups. And I think were this not to have happened or the situation didn't arise, I still think he probably would have been out of a job before the end of the season. I think they just happened in this case to have a cause that they want to do. I don't think that saying that you're trying to use your Fifth Amendment rights was a particularly great job by, I believe it was the president or one of the GMs.
It was James O'Connor, who oversees the hiring of the coaches in the organization, who was on the hot seat himself, by the way, for a number of soccer-related reasons. Has been for a little bit here. He made the fifth. He pled the fifth in jest, as many of us do when we're making jokes with people. That probably wasn't the time to do that, though.
Yeah, I only read the transcript, so some of that context was a little bit lost. But yeah, I'm not surprised Holly is out. I don't think anybody is. The problem, I think, is a lot of people weren't surprised when Holly was out the first time and never expected to see his name. And then he cropped up for U.S. soccer, and then he cropped up as the coach of Louisville in their inaugural season. So I do wonder if he might find his way into a scouting position at U.S. Soccer. He might find some connection there. It is no secret that Christy Pierce-Rimpone are together. She has as many connections in U.S. Soccer as he does, likely more. And that is a factor, right? Somebody who has a lot of connections, has a lot of opportunity for a job. And Holly seems to be affable enough to find himself in jobs. So as much as I feel like a lot of people think that this is the end for him, give it a couple years. Soccer has a very short memory.
I have a hunch that this end for him might be a little firmer. I agree with you that soccer has a very short memory, but I think the context around this one, I dare say hopefully, might hang on him for longer. Because when he was fired from Sky Blue, he was fired because he was doing a bad job of managing the team. Maybe there were other factors involved that I didn't know about at the time. But I wasn't entirely surprised that he had popped up as an off-the-radar, never really having to talk to anybody, U.S. national team advanced scout of other teams. This one's different. This one disqualifies you, I think, from future employment for a whole lot longer than at least my recollection of how things ended at Sky Blue.
Well, we thought Craig Harrington was also going to have the same fate, and he went down to Mexico and got himself a head coaching job. So it depends on if somebody in France or Germany, England, or Mexico wants a head coach who has NWSL experience. They might take a risk on Holly. It seems like that is not out of bounds. Now, do I know if he's going to take one of those jobs? No. But it wouldn't surprise me if in a year or two we see him attached to another club.
So we go now to Kansas City, the last place team in the standings. And we'll start by talking about the fact that they traded, they've made a lot of deals this summer. One of them brought them AD Franch. And the Portland fans obviously were very upset by this, understandably, because she's played very well for them. And couldn't understand why anybody would possibly want to leave Portland for any reason for the rest of their lives. One gets the impression, RJ, that AD Franch is actually quite happy being back at Kansas. What is your sense of it?
My sense is Portland had the problem of too many good goalkeepers, and AD French was going to be the odd one out come the expansion draft if she didn't leave. Going to Kansas City seemed to be something she was at least on board with, not outright happy about, for her comments when the trade happened. She seems to be happy to be back, as you said. And sometimes a player who is very good on a good team where there's a lot of competition for their position, especially goalkeeper, where you can't sort of switch in and out as you want, means that there's a move. There's enough good goalkeepers in the league where even the bad teams can have a really good goalkeeper. See Alyssa Nair in Boston for several years. So I don't think it's necessarily a bad thing for Portland, for Kansas City, or for AD French that the trade happened. I actually think it's good for all three in this case. And a lot of NWSL trades are not good for all parties. This seems to be one that is good for all parties.
And it looks like the Kansas City ownership, as they, sailed the ship while building it out at the same time because of how quickly they had to do everything. And they'll be in a much more stable, hopefully better financed situation last year and eventually moving into their own stadium, as we've heard. But it seems like that ownership group is really, really, really willing to make AD French the face of that franchise to the public, which is, I think, good for her.
It's good for her. And I also think it's good for that club to have somebody that they can sort of go out and use. There's other players on that team that are obviously talented and can be used as well for marketing. But I think having a hometown player is something that is important for some clubs, and AD French is able to have that. Now, Hugh Williams, I don't know if he is necessarily the person to help build the ship out and to coach. He was, I believe, a GM in Kansas City past, while Vlatko was the coach. I think they need a real coach. As much as people may or may not like Williams, I just don't think he is an NWSL caliber coach. And I do think that is partly the reason that Kansas City has looked the way they have.
Apologies for the dramatic pause there. Some news broke while you were talking that the National Hockey League is going to allow fully vaccinated and masked media members into the locker rooms this season. This is relevant to a soccer broadcast because it is just about time for MLS and the NWSL to acknowledge those of us in the press box who are fully vaccinated and masked. And maybe it's time for us to get back to doing the same so that we can talk to people in person for once and start to do our jobs. Now I'll get back off my soapbox. This has been the soapbox segment of the Women's Soccer Review. It is not sponsored by anybody because we have no sponsors. Hugh Williams, you mentioned 6 teams in the NWSL this year have changed or are going to change. In the case of the Portland Thorns, their manager. I'm not going to be surprised if it gets to 7 when all is said and done. Are you?
No, I wouldn't be surprised at all. It feels like Kansas City sort of had to pull things very, very quickly. And Williams was sort of the person that put their hand up and said, "I'll coach." Another bit of breaking news from Justin McMullen is the NWSL is not doing an investigation into Christy Hawley at this time, as we just talked about Louisville. So that's interesting, we'll say, just to dip back to Louisville for a moment. Whatever happened, the league is not investigating it. So it seems it's going to stand as it were.
I wonder if that's because he's been fired. I don't know, but
it very well could be.
It would be nice if somebody would say we're going to shut the door on him anyway. But I don't know what the technicalities of that are. Okay, we have made our way all the way through the standings. We have been on the line for almost an hour and a half now. So we will close out by getting to Angel City. And I want to say we're going to have some fun with this, but I get in trouble when I have too much fun.
Are we not
disparaging.
talking about San Diego? We're just going to skip the boring team that seems to actually know how to put a soccer team together.
And is doing everything by the rules and might actually
doing everything by the rules.
As I was leaving Portland, the night I left, the Freya Coombe news was breaking and the Christian Press news was breaking. And at the airport, I ran into a couple of fans who were flying down to Los Angeles, one of whom recognized me. So we chatted for a few minutes. And they're Angel City fans, and we were talking, and I said, I was curious as to what you all think of the way this team is doing its business. And they weren't necessarily thrilled with all of it, too. And we all three of us came to the conclusion that San Diego might beat them on the field next year. And if they do, it'll be an interesting little scene. Here is what we know at the moment about Angel City. They have signed Christian Press. They were then fined an undisclosed amount, which we assumed Alexis Ohanian paid out of the change in his couch, for announcing the signing of Christian Press before the contract was actually. This is Jeff Kassouf of Equalizer, friend of the show, former guest on here, very good friend of RJ and me both. The NWSL has fined Angel City FC for announcing the signing of Christian Press before the contract was actually signed and for ignoring the league's instructions to not announce the signing until it was approved. Last week's announcement was moved up for a specific media rollout. First of all, they'll pay the fine, and they'll pay the fine again tomorrow and the day after, and the day after that. It ain't going to matter with the money that they have. Second of all, that was some announcement for being illegal. And third of all, by the way, Christian Press has now taken a selfie in front of the ad and billboard in downtown LA. So that genie ain't going back in the bag. We all know that. And third of all, and I'm going to get myself in trouble now. And as I said, I'm not drinking anything alcoholic. Angel City comports itself as an organization existing for the purpose of blowing up old and staid rules about how things are supposed to be done in sports. Not limited to, but including, obviously, how women athletes are treated. And from the look of things, who can own a sports team, and having women in the C-suite and all such, which for the most part is great and we all agree with. Except some of the rules created and implemented by white men and old white men, though they may have been, exist for the purpose of having a fair competition in a sports league. And I don't think that Angel City should be allowed to get around them, even though they have a lot of money and big names and people saying that they're here to disrupt the soccer world the way that they disrupted the technology industry, and said the rules do not apply to me. Here I go making my money and you can't stop. I believe the NWSL being a sports league competition where, unless in fact the scales are going to be tilted, which I think a lot of other people who are fans of other teams in this sports league would say they should not be tilted. If the scales should not be tilted, then the NWSL needs to put its foot down and say, no, you can't do these things. And the person who needs to say them is Lisa Baird, and she needs to say them on the record. That fair?
No, I think that's absolutely fair. The NWSL has not had really a mega wealthy owner outside of the Reign with their Lyon connection. And the only thing that really seems to come out of that is just loaning players between Lyon and the Reign. It hasn't been, we're going to break rules and just pay fines. It seems like Angel City's motto is, as long as we're just going to get fined for it and can do it anyway, we got the money to pay the fine. We might as well do what we want, just pay the fine, and then we'll be happy. And it does sort of make me chuckle because the press rollout wasn't particularly great. It's like a video of her walking down the street, like thanking fans for her being in Angel City, but it wasn't like, you know, and look, Utah did a ton of bad things. I'm not saying Utah is the paragon of anything, but at least their videos were produced well. Like, you had the players talking about things, you had sort of this really good media experience. And it sort of felt like Kristen Press was also caught off guard by the fact that she was announced the way she was. It was like she was walking to lunch, filming it on her iPhone, which maybe if you're trying to disrupt the system is what you want. But it seems like for as much as this is a sports team, it feels like a brand whose only job is to sell jerseys so famous people can be photographed wearing a jersey of a women's team, the way in the 90s everybody was filmed wearing Lakers jerseys. Like, it doesn't feel like they actually care at all if they're very good. And we already have a team like that. It's called Orlando. We don't need another team that is marketing. We don't need another team that looks good on paper or looks good in press releases or looks good everywhere else. Like, LA needs to be good for the league to have that in their back pocket. And if the LA team is not necessarily interested in being good, they're just interested in being profitable and being able to do what they want because they have the money to pay the fines, the NWSL is going to really need to figure its stuff out and quickly, because I don't know if you let LA go a year or two just doing what they want and paying fines, if you'll ever be able to reel them back in.
And I'm going to say one other thing about something that annoys me with how Angel City is doing its business. And I'm going to get in some trouble for saying this, and I'll just have to deal with it. One of the things you get when you have an ownership model where everybody pitches in for their 2% of the stake and whatnot, and you have all of these former U.S. national team players who are among the ownership, two things have happened that have caught my eye. One is you have some of those players going on the Instagram pages of players who are not Angel Cities and trying to entice them to join Angel City. Abby Wambach did that. Now, granted, it was very early in the process, so I think she was forgiven, but she got one strike. And, it's like a false start in track and field. There's one false start. Everybody gets flagged. The next one's out. I'm not going to throw anybody out, obviously. But I haven't seen it happen to that degree the same way. And I think somebody might have said behind the scenes, hey, don't do that. But what they have not said yet is that if you are a television commentator who calls U.S. women's national team games regularly, or other major international events in women's soccer properly, you've got to watch what you say on air, and you've got to watch how often you are in Angel City's promotional videos. And that's where I'm going to get in trouble, because Julie Foudy is a friend of mine and I respect her work to a great degree. But if I was the league, I'm going to take it out of a lot of people's hands and put it in the league's hands and say, you can't do that. Whether you, and it's, Brianna Scurry's, it's not just Foudy in Angel City. Brianna Scurry's in Washington. Sarah Spain, who's an ESPN personality, is an investor in the Chicago Red Stars and has said on the record that she knows where to draw the lines, and I think she does. And you want to call me a stodgy old journalist, et cetera, great. I'll take it on this one. Because I think there need to be some lines there. Is that fair?
I tweeted about this and I got a lot of very annoyed people at me. During, I believe it was the bronze medal match, Arlo White made a joke about something to do with Angel City, and Foudy sort of played along with it. And I think it puts everybody in an awkward position, right? Because Julie Foudy is one of the biggest names when it comes to media in women's soccer. She interviews players, she talks to players, she reports the news, she calls the games. She is somebody who people trust. They trust her judgment. And I'm not saying that I don't anymore, but when she doesn't make it clear before she calls a game that she's an owner of an NWSL club who will very soon have players on the field that wear her club's kit, that is a conflict of interest, whether I think Julie Foudy is a good person or not. And I happen to agree with you. I respect her a great deal. And I think she's one of the best, but it's a huge conflict of interest. Abby Wambach on her podcast had Kelly O'Hara on. One of them was on the other's podcast. And she said, you should come play for Angel City.
Yeah, you can't do that.
You can't do that. But here's the problem. I don't think the NWSL gives the minority owners or the owners that don't hold a great stake. And I'm sorry, the former players are not putting in $15-20 million to Angel City. They're putting in a couple thousand, maybe 100,000. They're not putting in a ton of money. So you have a bunch of people who have ownership stake at a very small percent who have no idea. Abby Wambach does not know. She can't say before she said it. She probably does know now. But before she said it, do I think Abby Wambach genuinely knew I am breaking a rule here? No, she's just a former player talking to her buddies saying, I'm doing a cool thing. You should come do a cool thing with me. And I think that's a huge problem for the league because you have every Wambach is going to say a thing. Everybody's going to want to do that thing. Now, if you're a former player and you have an agent and you have other things, are you maybe going to do it? Maybe. But if you're really good friends with Abby Wambach and Abby's like, come on, we'll come play for you. We'll raise your salary. We'll give you a car. We'll give you an LA apartment. It's a really enticing deal, right?
Yeah. And that's why I think it needs to come from the league.
Yeah.
Just say to everybody, this is what you cannot do. We're going to spell it out. This is what you cannot do. The one thing that got me, and again, I hate to keep coming back to Julie because I have a lot of respect for her. The video where the 20 different people said, welcome to Angel City, Kristen Press, and they were all wearing Angel City gear. And Julie Foudy was one of those people. And that's the one where I would have said, we need to keep Julie out of this. Because that, to me, if you're calling a game and people know that you're an Angel City investor, it's happening right now, in fact, in men's soccer with one of the U.S. national team players. His name is Matthew Hoppe, who just signed for a Spanish club, Mallorca, in which Stu Holden, the former U.S. national team player and athlete council member, speaking of a whole other hornet's nest of conflicts of interest, who calls games on FS1 and is going to be calling Hoppe's games for the national team of a team that he owns. Not great. Happened in baseball. RJ is a bigger baseball fan than I am and knows that there have been ESPN baseball analysts in recent times who have been owners or front office people even, or scouts of major league teams whose games they called against other teams whose players they might want to sign. And it's a problem. And ultimately that got resolved. And one of those players quit the team she was working for the better. And God willing, ESPN's paying that person enough so that the quitting the job didn't make that much of a difference. But there are people like RJ and I raise these things at times when it is uncomfortable, when people don't want to hear them, because at some point it's going to come up and blow up and we'll say, no, we raised these a while ago to get them fixed at the time so that these things wouldn't happen. As a preventative measure, I mean, and I haven't even touched on how Angel City handled Freya Kuhn, because again, expiring contracts, this stuff happens in sports. I get that. But the stuff with press and the stuff with courting players, somebody needs to say it out loud. And RJ, I'm glad we've said it here on the show.
I think as long as they're getting fines with they can pay in pocket change, it's going to keep happening. And the problem is they have really deep pockets to put change in. And you can't fine them $100 million. Though, Lisa Baird might be able to do that and get everybody flights from one place to another that don't have 3-hour layovers. So, something to put in the idea box on Friday.
All right. We finally made it all the way through. We've been ambling on here for a very long time. RJ, thank you for the indulgence of going all the way through the standings and beyond.
Of course.
And we'll end it there. For RJ Allen, who you can follow on Twitter at The Soccer Critic, and from there get directed to all of the podcasts and the writing that she does. I'm Jonathan Tannenwald of the Philadelphia Inquirer. I really hope it will not be 2 months until the next show. I don't think it will be, because I'm trying to line up some other guests, especially when the U.S. women's national team comes back to action in a few weeks, and we begin the countdown to what is going to be the end of an era for Carly Lloyd, and who knows whether it will be for other players. So we'll be back when that happens. For RJ Allen, I'm Jonathan Tannenwald. Thanks for listening to the Women's Soccer Review here on the Sports Podcasting Network.